Okay, so this live stream is only going to be about an hour long. We have two live FA Cup second round games today, and two live FA Cup rounds second game, round two second game, FA Cup second round games tomorrow, and one on Monday. I missed the one last night because I wasn't aware it was on the TV. So there'll be some match reviews of the FA Cup taking place this weekend and on my birthday on Monday. Yes, the sports boffin actually has a birthday. I'll be 32 on Monday. That'll be interesting. But the story, obviously, I want to leave with is the Major League Baseball lockout. I've looked at some of the questions I've been given, and one of the questions is how long will it last? And I tried to discuss that last night. The length of the lockout depends on several things. Whether both sides are willing to compromise and give ground on their position. And the only position that's been put forward that may get the talks moving in any direction is expanding playoffs. Um, this is like 26 years of pent up issues between the players and the league that have really not been resolved, and nearly came to the boil last year with the return to play. Uh, talks came down to the wire about returning to play last year. There was a disagreement over how many games would be played, the amount of the length of the season, and the intensity of the schedule, and how much salary would be retained or forfeited by the players. And the fact that obviously there was empty grandstand or reduced attendances, how much revenue sharing there will be. I did not watch the Blackhawk Capitals game yet. I will be watching that. That is on my watch list, so do not ruin it for me. Um, but it is on my watch list. I know that it's a surprise result. Is the best way to describe things. A surprise result. Um, but in saying that, I will be watching it. Do not ruin it for me. I want to see what happens. I know the result, but I want to see how it happens, how it plays out. But Alexander Ovechkin, what a season he is having this year. Considering his age as well, and players generally in his position, playing his style, their production drops off, his is increased. Um, I saw a crazy stat, not only about the amount of goals he scored, but the amount of hits he's delivered, and compared to other players of a similar age, and it is generally um, generally ridiculous that he's had, as many goals as he's had, but over 3,000 hits. And Sidney Crosby came into the league at the same time, and is not even close. But they do play a different style of game. Um, his production and and his style of play, he should be declining, not increasing his production and increasing his goal scoring and even his assists. He gets better with age. It is ridiculous. I don't know, how he's doing it. And this is with like Backstrom out the lineup. Scary that. Yeah, that's an issue for the women's game and the competitiveness of the women's game at various levels. At an international level, that is unfortunate. But we saw results like that in the men's game not that long ago in some internationals and cup games. Thankfully, we don't see those kind of results now in the men's game because the quality level has improved at the lower levels upwards. The women's game has got to bridge that gap, and of course, you're going to see the comments online from viewers of the game, saying, what's the point of playing these games? Um, which is part of the issue is bridging that gap and improving the quality across the board. It doesn't happen overnight. The women's game obviously is decades behind in development, and they're trying to develop at a quicker pace than the men's game ever did. Um, so you have to bear that in mind. I've got some spiders to deal with in a minute. Jesus Christ! But yes, that was a record-breaking scoreline. Um, you know, but that is the level that women's international football is at right now, between the top nations and those developing nations. So there is a gap to be bridged. Hopefully, as time goes on, those scorelines become rarer and rarer and less likely to happen. Um, but there'll be those who criticise. But the men's game had to go through its growing pains at times. as does the women's game. And a lot of fans forget that about the main game. But yeah, that is another problem. It's to do with, again, the money invested, the development of domestic league games, grassroots development, interest in those countries that are developing. No, it isn't. It's not a first world country in regards to women's sport. Absolutely, I will agree with that. Um, Other sports, however, women do much better in Latvia. Football isn't the national sport in Latvia, by the way. Ice hockey is more popular. Basketball is more popular. Handball is more popular. So if this was handball or ice hockey, we're getting battered. We're getting beaten. That's the best way to put it. Um, However, on saying that, yes, football, they're not on the same level. That FIFA needs to solve the problem. This is on FIFA now. Needs to figure out how to distribute the wealth of the game, how to improve the quality of the women's game in those developing nations when it comes to the game. But again, it's interest in the sport, it's uptake. Is there an interest in these locations? Is there the patience to develop? Are we trying to rush the development? I've really got to sort these spiders out. They are really pissing me off. So I've got a few spider webs, and there's a couple of big spiders that have just appeared out of nowhere, and they are bugging me intensely. But we'll deal with them before the football starts. But yes, these record-breaking scorelines, they hopefully will become rarer and rarer as the years go on. But I'm going to make reference to some league games. I mean, it wasn't that long ago in the Premier League. Watford, no, not Watford. Wigan were being beaten 10-0 by Spurs. Um, in the last decade. So even in the men's game at club level or international level, it still happens with these one-off games where there just generally is a poor performance. Um, and no one says, "Oh, this team shouldn't be playing," or "This country, yeah, well, maybe apart from San Marino, shouldn't be playing." Which is again what I find ridiculous. Um, but yes, the Australia, USA, Canada, and a handful of Euro teams. This is a problem. But you've also got to remember: is the sport popular with women anyway? In the countries where these massive record-breaking defeats happen, and the fact they're able to field a side says they've got enough players to field a national side. It's growing, but I think as time goes on, these results will become less likely. Yes. Is it a bad look? To a point. To a point, absolutely, it's a bad look. But time will assist in reducing the likelihood of of um, of that happening. I mean, could they change the way that the women's qualifiers work in comparison to the men's? Possibly, that is a possibility. However, the women's game is developing at a different pace to the men's game did, and we've seen the massive investment put into the women's game. And you can tell a fully professional outfit compared to a part-time outfit in the women's game is far more. I mean, I'll be watching the FA Cup in about an hour's time, and while Buxton are in the seventh tier, they've got professional players, and that is the difference. When you have lower levels in the men's game, there are a handful of professional contracts on those teams. So there's your difference. It's sad the quality level hasn't. You can't bridge that gap, but it's something that FIFA and the domestic FAs have to address, and UEFA and it is something that needs to be addressed. I mean, we saw it at the last Women's World Cup with I think it was the USA Thailand game. The golfing class was there. The fact the Thai team are qualified says they're the best Asian team apart from Japan and in Asia. Japan obviously are one of the best teams in the world, but it does show the massive gap. Who you compare footballing game to when you? I was just a goalkeeper at school. I didn't play past school level. I played a bit of five-a-side as an adult, but I was a goalkeeper. But again, I would reckon my school side could probably beat that Latvia side quite comfortably. Like 15, 16-year-olds could quite easily beat them, and that's the problem. Um, but again, we were like training 2, 3 times a week. If the weather was bad, we could train indoors. We played five-a-side indoors as well if the weather wasn't great. We had multiple facilities. We had multiple teams. We had inter-house competitions. So we were playing like twice a week. We would play one inter-house game a week and train 3 times and play on the weekend. So, and that was at boarding school. So that itself, and at state school as well. So private and public school, different terminology. State funded school and fee paying school. It doesn't matter. Football is the most popular sport in this country. Um, and I was playing with kids, who were at rugby union and football academy. So I went to a school which basically had a very good sports program. Um, Best I've ever made was actually mucking around with my mates on an Astro pitch, playing a bit of five-a-side kickabout with my mates down the local sports centre on the Astro on a terrible surface, which has now been completely, with the local authorities, put loads of funding in and completely redone it, so it's not the same surface. Um, the the difference in, and that was a funny one. I mean, that was a 30 yard bending screamer, and then I managed to get my fingers on it, bounce it off the post, bounce it off my head, and I ended up in the goal. Um, but that was a funny one. Unfortunately, there's no footage or photographs of me doing it, but it, I had some fun times. I had some penalty saves in there. I had some calamitous errors that were quite funny, but that's school days. That's like 20 years ago. That's nearly 20 years ago as a kid. I'm in my early 30s now, so I've got a bit older. I had some fun when we were playing like five-a-side in the sports hall and playing on Saturdays and that but when I was at the first building school, we played twice a week. One game on a Wednesday, one game on a Saturday. So we were playing quite regularly, and we were playing together, training together. And our pitches weren't great. I mean, there was one pitch we played on that was quite literally ankle deep mud, could barely see the lines. We won the game by a cricket score, I seem to remember. And I was playing outfield that day. My favourite position was goalkeeper, but I also played as a wing back and a winger. But I wasn't the best at football. I was far better at rugby and cricket. But that was just personal preference. While I enjoyed football massively at school, my enjoyment of the sport or soccer has diminished over the years, which is a shame because I enjoyed it massively when I was like a teenager, but I've enjoyed it less as an adult. Um, I haven't played five-a-side for years, about 7 years now, 7, 8 years. So yeah, last time I played was about 7, 8 years ago. I don't even know where my boots are anymore. Um, you know, I, do I miss playing? A little bit. My friend Rob, who lives literally a 2 minute walk away, he now does football coaching and refereeing at youth level. His knees are completely shot. He's 30. He can't play anymore. He's had to have a double knee replacement. Um, my friend Jake, who lives up in Liverpool, he was originally in the Stockport system when he was a teenager. He doesn't play anymore. He's got a young family. He's now an estate agent, a property agent. So a lot of us have. Yes, I played rugby. I played rugby for the local rugby club, and I played for school. Again, we're talking. I haven't played with a rugby ball for nearly 11 years, uh, 10, 11 years, 10.5 years since I played my last game. I was in my early 20s when I played my last game. School, I enjoyed it. Um, but yeah, I've had some nasty injuries. I've had some concussions. I've had a lot of shoulder problems, ankle issues, and there is no way I'll be playing again. I definitely have no fitness. I haven't been in the gym for 8 years. But yes, I played rugby. I played in a variety of positions, and eventually I settled as a winger fullback and just let the big boys beat each other up, and then somewhat get involved. Well, I'm going to deal with these spiders quickly. Give us 30 seconds. This is going to start annoying me now. Ugh. Where's my shoe? But one moment. Right, you're dead. I think you're dead. Problem solved. Right. And we're back broadcasting. That was just annoying, but I believe, hopefully, I've done it right. That they are deceased. I believe I have dealt with the issue. Yes, I played rugby. I did play rugby. I enjoyed it massively as a teenager at school playing it. Gave me a lot of confidence, quite frankly. But I had some injuries, and that then those injuries that occurred when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I didn't think too much of it at the time, having a sore shoulder and a sore ankle and a sore knee. As I've got older, I've re-aggravated those injuries through work and other bits and pieces, and there it is not as yeah. I have re-aggravated those injuries. It's causing me long-term problems. So now I have a lot of sympathy for professional rugby players who are playing, and when they retire, I have a lot of sympathy for them when they have to medically retire or if they have to have a lot of layoffs because of injury. Um, I know what it feels like to a certain extent. I mean, I need to have shoulder surgery. I need to have my knees looked at. I've got problems with my neck, my back. Plus, the job I do is quite physical, so it's definitely having an impact on those injuries that I sustained playing rugby all those years ago. But it I did play. I did enjoy it. But yeah, I don't think I'll pick up a rugby ball again. It is what it is. That is unfortunately a byproduct of playing a contact sport. It is what it is. Like I still have massive problems with my neck and shoulder, my ankles, my knees. Um, it's a byproduct of playing. Yes, I've been to hospital with those injuries. I've had rib injuries. I've had neck and shoulder concussion. I think was the worst one I think that I've had, and it's something that at grassroots level they need to take more care of, and the same at professional level. We're seeing a lot of players retiring because of injuries, and when it's especially due to concussions, it is concerning. The professional game has a certain amount of money it can put into research and the care of players. Concussions, you're never going to take them out of the game. So I'm not arguing for like non-contact sport. Let's be clear on that. What I would hope would be the outcome would be, um, you know, better understanding of how to manage injuries like that. Make sure the players in their recovery process can go through the stages of back in non-contact training, back in contact training, back to match fitness and playing games in the best way possible. But I think that they've got to look at mandatory stand down periods for players having concussion. You know, that even if the player has passed the concussion test on the field, if he's been sent for a head injury assessment, I think that's his game done. Personally, I've noticed between the men's game and the women's game seems to have less issues with concussion. It's still an issue, but less players are going off at head injury assessments, missing games with concussion. It's because their tackle technique is better. Ironically, the women tackle better. In the men's game, the tackle technique at professional level is appalling. It is absolutely shocking in the men's professional game. both in league and union. I am really surprised with how bad the tackle technique is. Um, Obviously, in the wrong line, cocaine was horrible for Maradona's health, and it's a horrible drug in general. But in certain games, absolutely not. There is no. It was actually affecting his ability to play. That came out in the documentary. That's come out um, since he's passed and moved on. Ex-coaches and teammates were like, we were struggling to get him sober for games. Same with Paul Gascoigne. Same with George Best. Um, there are many anecdotes of these players that had addiction issues where their teammates off the record, or when they're writing their biographies or autobiographies or giving interviews, when asked about what was it like to play with um, insert player, and they're being frank and honest about the discussion. A lot of them are saying like George Best was so drunk once they had to pour coffee down his throat. He doesn't remember the game when he scores the hat trick. I think it was against Fulham, if I'm not mistaken, in the 60s. He was absolutely blasted. There was one where um, Paul Gascoigne went off and disappeared, and they ended up finding him at 4 o'clock in the morning playing squash in the hotel the night hours before a key FA Cup tie. His teammate had to be dropped. Gaza played, but there was definitely it was affecting his ability to train, let alone play. And imagine if he had stayed sober his entire career. A, he would still be alive, and B, imagine how many more goals he would have created, scored, how many more trophies could have been won, his level of performance, his discipline would have been better. Um, he, I don't think it elevated his play, not at all. No way, in my opinion, did it elevate his play and benefit his career. Um, but if you've watched the documentary, the drug use, he was already having issues when he was playing at Barcelona before he goes to Napoli. Uh, Basically, when he's playing in Argentina, when he's 16, 17 years old, he doesn't have these problems. Goes over to Europe to become the first £1 million South American player, or $1 million, or whatever you want to call it, um, becoming the world's most expensive player. Going over to Barcelona, it doesn't work at Barcelona. He's very quickly moved on to Napoli. His stay at Barcelona is disrupted by disciplinary issues. The Copa del Rey final against Athletic Bilbao, just watch the highlights of that game. He basically incites a riot. Um, yeah, it didn't work for him going to Barcelona. He ends up at Napoli. The rest is history. But yes, it definitely, like, he's not the only player I don't think to have had that problem in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There's Paul Merson's another one, a lesser player, but he's in the public eye here in the UK. Um, Famously had problems with alcohol, cocaine, and gambling all at the same time while still playing for Arsenal. And since he's retired as well, he's had his problems post playing. They've been very well documented in the English game. Gascoigne, Gaza, a contemporary of Maradona. Um, Massive issues with drugs and alcohol. Again, well documented. He's been very open and frank with his problems. His health, he's bankrupt basically. He's got no money. Oh, I've got to save this driver. Again, a talent. Uh, George Best, alcohol. He passed away young. Was there any chance of an alternative universe where Maradona never leaves South America for Europe? Well, actually, if Maradona was like 5 or 6 years older, he may never have played in Europe at the peak of his career. There was a lot of issues with the politics in South America at the time, and the best South American players were predominantly in the 70s, at least, based in South America. Very few were given permission to leave South America and play in Europe. It's to do with the Cold War. There's a lot of politics. The best Brazil side, the 1970 Brazil side, were all based in Brazil. The 78 Argentina side, I think there was like two players playing in Europe. I think Kempes was one, Mario Kempes. But again, predominantly based in South America. By the time the 80s rolls around, there's a relaxation on players from South America going to Europe. It's basically the South American invasion, as I call it. And by the 90s and the 2000s, look how many Argentinian, Uruguayan, Brazilian, Paraguayan, Chilean players are now playing. Colombian players are now in Europe. It's like the European invasion of the NHL in the 70s and the 80s, which then accelerates with the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the fall of the Soviet Union. Um, in an alternative universe, could it happen? Uh, I think the it's a difficult question, but if certain decisions had been made differently in European football, um, it could have been a different where Maradona stays in South America. It could have been different, but certain decisions would have had to have changed between the 60s and the 80s for that to have happened. Um, the it it's a very interesting question, but I think certain things would have had to been done differently, and we're talking about decisions that FIFA made, national governments made, local associations and regional like UEFA made certain decisions. Um, there was just certain things, and this was all at a governance level. This is not the players wanted to play. Um, that's plain and simple. But it was more in the 80s and the 90s that player movement was liberalised, where it truly becomes the global game in a sense, where players just go wherever they want to play, wherever their agent can find them a club, and whatever club is willing to pay the wages. Visa restrictions as well. There was a lot of restrictions on visas for overseas players in the European leagues. Um, the politics between East and West, between communist Eastern Europe and capitalist, well, free West, basically, were a stepping stone block in the way. So if communism hasn't collapsed in Eastern Europe, Maradona stays in South America. I think the liberalism of the visa restrictions, the fall of Franco in Spain, a brutal dictator, that has an impact as well. Um, if Franco and the dictatorship, if Franco, well, Franco dies anyway, but if the military dictatorship Spain had, the nationalist dictatorship Spain had, the monarchy isn't restored, remains in Spain, Maradona stays in South America. So there were just key moments, and there's all a political and governance level within FIFA and politics within countries. Certain key moments do affect the outcome of the globalization of the game, where players now can just play wherever they want. There are some squad limit caps on overseas players and overseas youngsters in youth academies, but the globalization and the liberalization of player movement is something that was happening in a variety of sports in the 70s and 80s and 90s. The NHL has seen it, football's seen it, rugby union's seen it, rugby league has seen it. It was something that was happening at the time anyway, for various reasons, but has exploded in the 80s and 90s to the game we have today. Um, but I don't think in an alternative universe, a lot of things would have to have ended up differently politically for Maradona to stay in South America. But Argentina at the time he was playing, when he burst on the scene, was under a military dictatorship. There was human rights abuses. Um, you know, it, it, it South America was a very interesting place to live in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it had an impact on how the football was played, and other sports developing as well. When the dictatorship basically falls, ironically, Maradona ends up in Europe towards the end of the dictatorship's time in charge of Argentina, the military junta. And he's already playing, and he ends up going to Barcelona, literally as the military dictatorship is collapsing in Argentina. He goes to Barcelona during the Falklands War, plays at the '82 World Cup, plays at the '86 World Cup, plays at Italia '90 and USA '94. Yes, so your question is interesting, but imagine if the military dictatorship had stayed in Argentina. I don't think the players leave Argentina in the numbers they did. Very few would have got permission to play in the countries of Europe, and it's ironic because when Franco dies and the monarchy is restored, Mario Kempes ends up at Valencia. Um, Maradona ends up at Barcelona. The military junta doesn't last much longer after he leaves Argentina. So certain permissions were given to certain players. But after democracy returns predominantly to South America, more um, more liberalisation of player movement. So there's a lot of politics behind there as well, in South America at the time. It was a very toxic political environment. He's one of the most pulverising. That's a good word, pulverising athlete of all time, if not who is. You have the refrigerator in the NFL for pulverisation. Um, he's definitely one of the first real global superstars. I think Pele obviously is the first global superstar in my opinion, but he was definitely in the modern era one of the first global superstars that is known around the world. I think Pele, Maradona, Cruyff, Eusebio, um, you could argue, uh, were you know the first 5 or 6 global superstars. You could definitely everyone could say who knows who they are, their impact on their particular sport. Um, but what do you mean by pulverizing? Polarizing, I think, is the word you're looking for. Polarizing. Pulverizing means you just physically destroy people. Polarizing, I think, is definitely the word you want to use there. Um, yeah, you have to admit his skill level and his talent was there, but the controversy around his character is there. Eusebio was actually the same. He had a problem with the drink, less well documented, but his contemporaries went, "This guy has some issues," and it did affect Eusebio's career, and he's now sadly passed away as well, which is a massive shame. But looking at um, I think he is a very polarizing character of all time. But then you've got Lance Armstrong in cycling, and you know what's obviously we now know about Lance Armstrong and his time in the Tour de France, and Marco Pantini, one of his rivals, who's also sadly passed away. The issues surrounding their time in the Tour de France and what's now come out about the doping culture and the cheating culture in the Tour in global cycling. That's pretty polarizing. Mike Tyson and Amanda Holyfield, the ear biting incident, both very polarizing boxers in their time. And Mike Tyson, definitely one of the most divisive characters in boxing. But no, I wouldn't. I think there's a handful that are on an equal par for how you judge their character. There is no doubt on the skill that they had. I mean, Campese for Australian Rugby Union, um, hated by his teammates, one of the best wingers in the game. Um, there's definitely certain athletes, doesn't matter what sport they participate in, definitely have that polarization factor, where you either love them or hate them. Um, and a lot of them do have, you know, issues is the best way to describe them. Character flaws. There's definitely something to be said about off field discipline. Magic Johnson, another one in basketball. I don't know too many Major League Baseball. I'm not familiar with a lot of the Major League Baseball, the steroids era, but you're a baseball fan. The steroids era and the steroid scandal in baseball. There were some star players drawn into that, and that's where I think the damage to the image of the league and the sport is still recovering. And now we have this lockout and then the unrest in Major League Baseball. And I want to actually talk a bit more about that because it's highly interesting. And as you are a baseball fan, you can ask me as many questions and have the discussion about what's going on with Major League Baseball. I've been asked the question, and I've seen this in comment sections. I've seen it on you know, uh, other YouTubers who've been covering the lockout and what's happened. It's been brewing for 26 years, and that's now polarizing all the baseball fans about all the baseball stars. Um, in regards, but is Maradona the most polarizing athlete? I think he's one of the top 10. One of the top 10. But there's going to be another one that comes along that has a similar you know, um, divisive character or divisive, personality, or love him or hate him. there is going to be another one who comes along uh, who divides opinion about he or she, because there are some female athletes as well who definitely divided opinion over many years. Um, Less of them, admittedly. I thank God I got rid of those spiders. They were so annoying. They've gone. I think I've defeated all the spiders in my flower. I haven't. There's another one. They're everywhere. I've really got to hoover this flat up. Um, I'm having a spider invasion in here. Oh, it's going to be fun over the next couple of days. If we're talking about divisiveness, there's definitely there's definitely something to be said about certain individuals dividing opinion, um, which is only fair, but it's also subjective. But no, with Major League Baseball, I mean, all these baseball stars, they're losing a lot of their standing because of the lockout. How long this lockout lasts um, is down to the Players Association and the league giving some ground on their position. And the only proposal put forward that may start the ball rolling a little bit and they can discuss things is expanding the playoffs. Will hockey still be the fourth? Well, if Major League Baseball has a protracted lockout, and I say protracted, um, and fans getting frustrated, they're going to want to get their sports fix somewhere else. Now, I am wearing a baseball hat. I know it's from a minor league affiliate of Major League Baseball, but I'm wearing my hat. I think the NHL has an opportunity to definitely grow. It is growing, and they've got a better TV deal now. More American players playing as a percentage of the league. Um, Growth of minor league hockey and junior hockey in the US is there for all to see. With Major League Baseball having this lockout, um, there is an opportunity for the NHL to gain viewers, gain popularity. I don't think it's challenged by Major League Soccer or Major League Rugby or some of the growing sports in the US and Canada. Um, Unless the NFL has a lockout or a player strike at some point, and unless the NBA has a similar labour unrest at some point, I can see it being in the top four, maybe third popular sport by the end of the decade because Major League Baseball has so many problems. On saying that, on saying that, it's still massively strong in the Canadian market. It's a license to print money in Canada. Um, most of the still the highest percentage of players in the NHL are Canadian. In the US side of things, yeah, Major League Baseball, there's a lot hinges on what happens with this lockout, and if there's further labour unrest within Major League Baseball in the next decade. That's the best way to answer that question. But expansion's been very successful in the NHL. You have to remember though, arena size. So fans going to games is less in number because the arenas are smaller. It's all about the TV deal now, and growing in those non-traditional markets, making those non. I mean, and it's all about. There will come a point where where Gary Bettman is no longer commissioner. He's one of the longest-serving league commissioners in history of that style of league governance. He's been there since the early 90s. He has brought stability to the league. Yes, we've. What's your thoughts on the Premier League club speaking out against independent regulator tax cap? Agreed. Self-regulation has failed. The FA, the Premier League, and the Football League have failed. Um, they, it, yeah. Um, you know, uh, it just shows how out of touch they are with what is going on. It's look, as the last 18 months has told us anything, last 2 years has told us anything. It's failed. The game is divided. They're saying they're doing all these things, which they're really not. They claimed they didn't need fans in attendance to make money. That was a lie. They did need fans in attendance to make money. Gate receipts are far more valuable to them than they realised. The TV deal has now peaked. It won't get any bigger, not unless something magical happens. The average age of a fan is in their mid-40s, so they're already pricing out the next generation of fans as things stand. Wages are out of control. And we're having this argument about Major League Baseball. Let's just think on this. Different league, different sport, massive wage inflation, where some of these contracts are worth 40 to 50, $60 million a year, which is quite insane money. Another league, um, no salary cap, being brought to its knees because the owners are like, eh, okay, we'll do this. Um, my thoughts on Premier League clubs speaking out against an independent regulated tax cap. Well, unfortunately, the imbalance is there. When you've got lower level clubs saying we need a salary cap, we need to have a more strict financial fair play system, basically, so a salary cap. We need to have stricter financial rules. We need to have more power at the discussion table. Fans need to have a bigger say, and smaller clubs are saying this. This is what is generally striking in the football pyramid. The lower levels are saying this is out of control. We cannot sustain the level of outgoings that we have. In order to stay alive, we need to wind it in a bit. And this is where the players need to stand up and say, we're overpaid. The players need to take responsibility. Oh, the stricter owners check, I have no doubt, is definitely, has to happen. The fit and proper persons test does not work. Look how many bad owners are in the game, be it domestic or overseas owners. There is no denying that. Absolutely, I would agree with having stricter checks. Yeah, absolutely. The Berry situation, I think, is why they want the stricter checks, which makes logical sense. What happened at Berry should never have happened, but the Football League needs to take some responsibility for that. The FA needs to take some responsibility for that. I've done videos on the Berry situation a couple of years ago. There's a massive failing with the EFL and the FA there. Same with the Premier League. Premier League clubs try to block the Newcastle United takeover because apparently it would make the league more competitive, which is only a good thing for the brand. Some of the clubs were like, "Oh, well, no, we're going to have to compete harder to get in the top six." That's a good thing. So, yeah, the established order was worried that they would not be at the top anymore because Liverpool and Man United could never get relegated. Man United have spent time in the second tier of English football, just putting it out there. Man City have been as low as the fourth division of English football. I'm just putting it out there. Chelsea were basically bankrupt, you know. Yeah. There are a lot of question marks about the ownership of a multitude of clubs. The Glazers would have to leave as well because they bought the club with someone else's money. They're constantly in debt. So, and Man United fans, I don't know how they'll feel about that. Probably be very happy if the Glazers were gone. To be fair, I think there's definitely an argument to have stricter checks and balances. I think 47 changes is too much in one go. I think there needs to be reform drip fed. So every couple of seasons, this next change has to happen by this season. You have to sort of slowly reform. Massive overhaul overnight would bring chaos, which is not what the game needs. But there definitely needs to be reforms added along the way over the next 10 years. Have the reforms each season. Timeline them, get them in there. But I think the stricter owners test comes down to what happened at Bury and the attempted block of the Newcastle takeover. But they were happy for the Man City takeover to take place. Scratch your head at that one. So there's definitely double standards there. Leicester City were the only team to publicly speak out about the Man United and Liverpool proposal to shrink the league. They went, no, it's not right. And they were the first club to also, the EPL, to say this is wrong. We will reject our invite if we were ever invited by the European Super League, straight up. And as soon as Leicester City did that, and they'd won the Premier League and they were about to win the FA Cup, it sort of started the snowball effect of those that had signed up because fans were like, well done, Leicester City. Load of applause. Foreign ownership, right? So you're going, oh, it's a foreign owner. But Leicester City making their statements in regard to Man United and Liverpool's plan this time last year, proposal to shrink the league, they came out straight away, nah, we're against it. And then they were the first club to say if the European Super League came along, because we were domestic champions to invite us, we would reject it out of hand. But yeah, the fact that straight away they're like, no, we're going to reject this straight away. We're not even going to debate it. No, dig your heels in. It's going to happen. It has been not only when the government says it's recommended, it means we're going to do this whether you like it or not. Don't like it, we'll fine you. Um, and you know, the club owners, they need to be very, very careful. And the same is Major League Baseball. The same debate uh, because they're in a lockout. Yet days before, some of these teams were signing players to 40, $50 million a year contracts, which is ridiculous. Like ridiculous amounts of money. There's a massive imbalance there, and again, it's unsustainable. Um, and and I did a video looking at the history of the labour unrest in the Major League Baseball, and between I think the mid 70s and the mid 90s was just a period of chaos. It was like every 2 to 3 years there was a shutdown, and for some reason, for the last 26 years, there's been no stoppages in Major League Baseball. So the league has meandered along with these undercurrent problems simmering away. They somehow extend the CBA every year, and then last year when they were discussing the return to play, the league wanted to have a set amount of games. The players wanted a different amount of games. Then there was complaints about how condensed the schedule would be, how much money they would have to, give up out of their salaries, retention salary and escrow. And we nearly had the situation we have now 16, 17 months ago. How it was narrowly averted was other leagues were planning their start-up dates. Other leagues globally had already restarted and have put protocols in place and discussed with their media partners TV deals. And it made Major League Baseball look really stupid. So they were like, oh, we'll play the rest of this season. We'll play next season. We'll extend the CBA until November 2021. November 2021 rolls around. The CBA runs out. Discussions aren't going anywhere. There's proposal and counter proposal, and we end up where we are. The Premier League or English football could end up in the same position because it's not just the Premier League; it's the whole of the football league that needs this independent regulator. Um, the lower league clubs put thumbs up to it. It's a handful of Premier League clubs, especially at the top end, that are sticking their heels in, and they have far too much power when it comes to decision making. But they are outnumbered. And the longer they stick their heels in, the worse the PR becomes for the league, for the sport. The, the players themselves have to understand they've got to take less money. Their salaries are going to have to no longer go up and up and up because it's reached a point now where it's just not sustainable anymore. There's a reason why Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Juventus are still wanting the European Super League. It's money issues. Juventus is because they're involved in a corruption scandal yet again. Surprise, surprise. Barcelona and Real Madrid have just they thought they were a license to print money, and they weren't because there's a finite. I mean, the money bubble was going to burst anyway. It was just sped up by COVID. We'll be having this discussion in 4 or 5 years' time. If COVID hadn't rolled along, I have no doubt that the current financial situation that football clubs find themselves in would have been exposed in about midway through the 2020s. There was no way the Neymar transfer, that tells you how long Barcelona's been in money problems for. Ronaldo to Juventus a couple of seasons ago tells you that the money problems at Real Madrid and Barcelona have been there for some time. They were able to mitigate it because they were constantly winning trophies domestically and in Europe. But it was only a matter of time, even with trophy wins, that there were going to be problems. The fact that Neymar was meant to be the new Messi, and he goes, tells you that Barcelona had money issues long ago, and they were trying to just put out one fire by just patching the hole there. In Major League Baseball's case, I don't know how much money, Dan, you put in as a fan with buying merchandise and going to games. But I'm assuming it's a fair income stream you have put in as as a fan. You put a fair bit of your own money in. You are a younger person. You're in your 20s. Again, ironically, Major League Baseball, much like um, English football, the average fan in attendance is older. Younger people are not going to games. They are not picking up the sport as much as they were 30 years ago. It's an aging fan base. It's a shrinking fan base because old people, guess what they do? They die. Um, it's a fact. So Major League Baseball has the same problems that English football does. The average fan in attendance is in their mid 40s, and in baseball, it's actually higher. They're actually in their late 40s. Their average disposable income, they have to be in the higher income brackets to regularly go. They've done surveys on this. Um, Younger fans aren't going to games in the numbers. So the percentage of the crowd that is below the age of 30 is lower now than what it was in the 70s and 80s. It's fact. So there's definitely some long-term trends that Major League Baseball needs to address. So it's less popular amongst the youth, um, which is complete difference to other sports. Whereas the growth of Major League Soccer, Major League Rugby, the NHL, in the newer locations that they've put teams, there are younger fans going, which has altered just the stats. When you look at Major League Rugby or Major League Soccer, look how many young fans are in attendance. It's a key indicator that the youth are interested in this league or interested in this team. So Major League Baseball has got a lot of demographic problems. Its fan base is older. The average age of a fan in attendance is older. Um, Younger fans make up a shrinking percentage of match-going fans and viewership on TV and on online streaming services. So your generation, well, the 1830 club, which is what I call the 18 to 34 demographic, are turning their back on baseball, and they are slowly turning their backs on English football. Um, will a regulator address that? I mean, ticket price is another one of the points that's been brought up. The price of tickets, the price of merchandise. Man United's last kit was 140 quid for a shirt. A shirt that cost £2.50 to make. I'm sorry, that is an extortionate markup for a product that's not even worth 25 quid. And that went down badly with fans. That some of the kits, replica jerseys, we're looking at in store. I don't know about overseas in the US how much that would cost you to import one with the importation tax and the markup because it's an overseas product. Attendance Serie A is the same. There are attendance issues. It doesn't get spoken about. There have been attendance issues in the past, and that was in the wake of the match fixing scandal. That really a lot of fans was like, "We've had enough of this sport." Uh, you know, some of the biggest clubs were involved. Fans were like, "Your average fan, well, I'd rather watch rugby. I'd rather watch the ice hockey. I'd rather spend my money on motorsport. I'm going to take my money elsewhere." And it's taken a long time for Italian football to start growing attendances again. They're still not at the level they were in peak early 2000s, late 90s. At the same time, economics as well. The Italian economy is not in a good place right now and hasn't been in a good place for a very long time. The financial crisis of 2008, 2009, that period really hurt the Italian economy. So Italians have less income to spend. And in some parts of Italy, youth unemployment's at 40%. So our age group. In southern Italy, the youth unemployment rate is 40 to 50%. That tells you all you need to know. There's a lot of high unemployment in certain areas. Some cities are doing quite well, but COVID as well has impacted attendances because a lot of people lost their extra people have lost their jobs. God, that's it. So economically, Italy is not doing as well as the UK economically. And I'll be interested to see the attendances of the FA Cup games I'll be watching this afternoon. Doesn't matter that it's the lower levels of the game. I'll be very interested to see if there's any empty seats. There's 5 games I'll be watching. I missed a game last night, but there'll be 5 more games I'll be watching over this weekend and into Monday. I'll be very interested to see the attendance figures. I don't think no, Let's not change the league structure. Um, let's not Americanise sport any further. Um, I'm not in favour of that. I mean, rugby union's done that. Rugby league's done that. How do you feel about that? I'm not so keen on that. That's personal preference. We've Americanised it enough. Sorry on that, but it can work for other sports. Like, there's enough problems with fixture congestion. When you've got high-profile coaches saying now it's getting a welfare issue for players, let's not fiddle with the system anymore. Um, we're already debating about removing FA Cup replays altogether. Well, and then the match kicks off in 10 minutes. So this live stream, I'll be shutting down in about 5 minutes to get ready for the game, and then I'll do my match reviews and do a live stream tomorrow. But no, there's no, the Premier League and English football or European football should not do a playoff structure like that. The playoffs themselves, there's debate about changing the playoff structure in Scotland, the relegation playoff structure in Scotland, and there's also a debate possibly to change how many teams get relegated and promoted from the Football League and the National League. But that's tinkering with it. That's not changing it completely. They're Ironically, the Championship playoff final is a more valuable game in global football than the Champions League final. I don't know if the regulator's going to look at that. The fact that the clubs are trying to resist, or a handful of clubs are trying to resist, is a joke because they are outnumbered. And it's a bad PR move when there's growing pressure from your customer base to change. You're resisting change. Fans will go elsewhere. They will go, "No, I've had enough of this." Your mainstream fan will go, "Is it worth me spending stupid amounts of money?" Um, Favourite small club? Well, some of my close friends support Aldershot in the National League, and they have been a Football League club in the past. And they're just down the road. Maidenhead United, they're out the FA Cup now. I used to live by the stadium. Exeter City, my friend lives by the stadium in Exeter. They're in the lower leagues. Um, uh, I don't really have a favourite. My family are Yeovil fans, my dad's family, and they're playing later today. I'll be watching that game, and my uncle, I have no doubt, will be watching that game as well. My dad's brother. So Yeovil Town, I have a little soft spot for, simply because a lot of my family support Yeovil Town. I've got a lot of family in the West Country of England. Just do your geography. They were in the Football League at one point. They were as high as the Championship, and then successive relegations and bad ownership, sort of some bad management decisions did for Yeovil. They overextended themselves too quickly, and they hit some money issues. And they're doing well in the National League. It'd be nice to see them back in the Football League at some point. They're definitely a club that deserve to be in the Football League, but I think they need to be a bit more sustainable in their projections going forward. They had back-to-back promotions, overextended themselves, and then tumbled through the leagues very, very quickly. Their best players left, and they're back to square one, which is a massive shame because they were a success story going through the leagues, and then they reached their ceiling very, very quickly, overachieved, and then went back to earth very, very quickly. But they're a good couple of hours away. But I've got family in Yeovil, so I've got friends in Yeovil, so they're a club that I like to see do well. I keep a tab on their scores. West London, you've got Brentford. I've got my friend Rob is a Fulham fan. I've got some of my friends are Chelsea fans. They're bigger clubs, obviously. They're in the Premier League and Championship. I like to see Accrington Stanley do well. Just for the history of football, and the original Accrington club were founders of the Football League, so that's a football hotbed. They work on the smallest budget in the Football League, even though they're in League One. I think they've got the smallest stadium in the Football League as well, if I'm not mistaken, Accrington Stanley. So they really they're operating well above themselves. What other clubs are floating around? There's not really any small clubs near me that I'm overly passionate about currently in the FA Cup. The ones I mentioned, I think I have soft spots for. Maidenhead United are already knocked out. They lost to Halifax in the last round. They had a high scoring, I think it was 10 goals in that game, 11 goals in that game, and they were at home as well, which was ridiculous. But there's a handful of clubs floating around that, yeah, local fan. I think a lot more fans are turning away from big clubs and putting their money into smaller clubs. My next door neighbour's a Stockport fan. A friend of mine plays for Stockport. If we're talking about what's better, NFL or NCAA, I've watched some NCAA football. It is very, very entertaining. It's been a long time since. I don't really have an opinion on that. Really, I haven't watched American football for quite some time, so I don't really have an opinion. I actually prefer the CFL for the style of play, but that's personal opinion. Um, in saying that, it's slightly different rules. I haven't really followed American football for a while. There's issues with American football, which are well known. There is no affiliate league to the NFL, so player development. That's something the NFL could address, but it is what it is. But anyway, I'm going to end the stream now because the match is about to kick off that I'm going to watch. So thank you very much, obviously, for all your questions. My match reviews for both games today will be up later, so keep your eyes peeled. Hopefully, a lot of people who will be interested in them. Thank you very much for your questions. I will have obviously those match reviews up for you later this evening, and then I'll have a live stream tomorrow, 2 more live games tomorrow, which I'll post the reviews for, and then there's a live game on Monday. So keep your eyes peeled on the channel for some match reviews of the FA Cup second round. Hopefully, there's no replays out of these games. Hopefully, they're done on the day, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.